Welcome, delegates, distinguished guests. You have returned to the venue to continue our today's event. After the morning extremely in-depth sharing of the experts, next the program we will come to the topic that I think everyone here is very interested in, which is transparency. This is also the essence of DeFi. In order for everyone to better understanding why transparency is so important, we would like to invite expert Mr. Braden Abik, CTO of Blockboard, to the stage. Please welcome.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all had a good lunch and are enjoying the event so far. My name is Braden Abik. I am the co-founder and CTO of Blockboard, and for my talk today, I'm going to be going over bringing transparency to DeFi analytics. The title is a little bit of clickbait, but basically I'm going to be going over some of the benefits of DeFi, some of the problems with DeFi, and some ways us as a community and us as an industry could bring more transparency into decentralized finance. And so the first question, and the question that we're going to try to answer throughout this keynote, is how much transparency is there in DeFi data and analytics? So I guess as kind of a preface, we could use a recent event that had occurred in the blockchain space, which was the unfortunate downfall and collapse of FTX. For those of you who are unfamiliar, FTX is one of the largest centralized exchanges in the space. They recently declared bankruptcy, and there's been a lot of, I guess, bad PR, some interesting PR, I guess, some news articles. And the big question has been, how does the FTX collapse affect blockchain? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I think the obvious answer is it's obviously a net negative for the space. But I think certain segments, certain areas in blockchain, such as DeFi, could actually get something net positive out of something like this. I think it really outlines the importance of decentralized finance and kind of highlights some of the issues that centralized providers and centralized exchanges have. And so with a centralized exchange like FTX or like a Binance, you as a user are depositing your funds into their exchange. You could then trade those assets, and then hopefully, if all goes well, you'll be able to withdraw them at the end. If we look at DeFi, DeFi is a decentralized alternative, and one segment in DeFi is decentralized exchanges. So with a decentralized exchange, you can basically trade assets in a peer-to-peer way, and you don't have to have a counterparty, and you're always in control of your assets, of your tokens, and you don't need to trust a centralized third party. So we can go over some comparisons of DeFi versus centralized finance. Since we've already been talking about exchanges like FTX, we can look at two examples. So on the left-hand side, we have a sample trade that occurred on a centralized exchange, which was Binance. And on the right-hand side, we can see a sample trade that occurred on a decentralized exchange. And for this example, this exchange was Uniswap. So on the left-hand side, we can see a couple basic object properties. We can see the price of the trade, the quantity of the trade, and then a couple Boolean fields below. And this data came from Binance. This was a recent trade that occurred on Binance. And so we can get a couple pieces of information here. We could obviously see the quantity of tokens being traded was 0.52 at a price of $1,349. But this information is very sparse. We don't know who this trader was. We don't even know if it was Binance themselves trading against their users. We don't know if it was a market maker, if it was Alameda, if it was a regular user. And so there's a lot of unanswered questions when you're looking at centralized exchange data. Whereas on the right-hand side, we can actually look at a decentralized exchange, Uniswap. So we could see some similar properties. We could see obviously the amount that was being traded, the quantity, the price, but we also get some other information such as the block number that this trade occurred on, the TX or the transaction hash, and we also know who this trader actually was. And so with this information, there's some pretty big benefits. The first being the transaction hash. So anybody, including anybody in this room, could actually copy that transaction hash, go to an Ethereum block explorer like Etherscan, and verify this information themselves without trusting me that I copy and pasted this right. So anybody could see this at any point in time. We also have the block number as well, the block number that this trade happened on. And so the Ethereum network acts as immutable proof of this trade occurring. And so we'll always have this data here, even in the future. Whereas on the left-hand side with Binance, we are completely dependent on Binance as a provider for hosting this information. So if the Binance API were to go out or were to crash, we would no longer be able to access this information. And we're also trusting Binance that this information is actually accurate since they are the provider of the data. If we look at another really quick snippet, this will be a little bit quicker, but we could see very similar data again, left-hand side being Binance, right-hand side being Uniswap. On the left-hand side, we could see a sample order book. And so on centralized exchanges, you have order books for liquidity, whereas with decentralized exchanges, you have liquidity pools. And so on the left-hand side, we can see some bids, right? So somebody is willing to buy 431 of token X for a price of $4, and somebody is willing to sell 12 of token X for a price of 4, 20 or 200. Again, there's a lot of missing information here. We actually don't know if this is the same person. We don't know who these people are. We don't know if it's a market maker. Whereas on the right-hand side, we could see somebody adding liquidity to Uniswap, right? So similar to the previous slide, we get a lot more information. We know who this trader is. We know the sender. We know the owner. We know the transaction hash. And we have this immutable proof or this immutable record that this liquidity action had taken place. And so I think at this point, it's pretty clear that decentralized exchanges are obviously a winner when it comes to transparency and what people are doing with their trades. But there are also some pretty big issues with DeFi, and I think we're still in the pretty early stages of DeFi. But I think us as an industry, there's obviously ways that we could help drive adoption into this space. And so one of the biggest issues, at least in my opinion, with DeFi is around liquidity fragmentation. And so what is liquidity fragmentation? So we have this screenshot here, which is taken from Uniswap. we could see the TVL is $2 billion, which means there's $2 billion worth of liquidity on Uniswap. We could also see the volume is $1 billion. And this was over a 24-hour period when the screenshot was taken. And if you compare this data to Uniswap's centralized counterparties like a Binance or like a Coinbase, these volumes are actually very significant, right? So for those of you who are unaware of decentralized exchanges, there is some actual activity happening on these decentralized applications. And these statistics might look very good. One of the issues with decentralized exchanges are there's several of them, right? So this is Uniswap. There's other exchanges like SushiSwap, QuickSwap, PancakeSwap, etc. They all seem to have funny names, but they all have different levels of liquidity in them, right? So SushiSwap might have $500 million of liquidity, whereas Uniswap obviously has $2 billion of liquidity. And you kind of get into the situation where all these different decentralized protocols are competing against each other for market share, right? For users. They want to be the best protocol. They want to have the most users on them. But this is ultimately bad for the end user because as a user who is getting into DeFi, you have to ask yourself, which DEX do I pick, right? Do I trade on SushiSwap? Do I trade on PancakeSwap? Where will I get the best price? And so all these questions come up because of liquidity fragmentation, right? If all the liquidity was in one place, you as a user know exactly where to go and where to get the best price. And so we can look at a real life example of this exact problem. So on the left-hand side, there's a screenshot. On the right-hand side, there's another screenshot. Both of these screenshots were taken at the exact same time, but there's different values in them. So the left-hand side is on Uniswap. And so if I was a user and I wanted to trade 10 Ethereum, and I wanted to buy the Synapse token as an example, on Uniswap, I would receive 17,221 Synapse tokens, which is great, right? So as a user, I might just execute that trade, get my Synapse tokens, and be happy. But if I had looked at other avenues or other sources of data, I would actually be getting a better price had I traded somewhere else for this particular example. So on the right-hand side, we could see the same 10 Ethereum, but this time the user would have gotten 18,615 tokens. So obviously there is a benefit with trading on the right-hand side, which was through a trade aggregator, than just using Uniswap. And so as an end user, I think it's important for these types of things to be well communicated. I think that DeFi is a relatively new and complex place. And so I think if we want to get adoption and users into this space, I think it's really important that we make these things clear, we make it easy for the user to understand, and also easy to gain access to liquidity. Okay, so why is it important to bring more transparency to DeFi? So there's three reasons here. The first reason why it's important to bring more transparency into DeFi is to have a better understanding of risk, right? So as a user who's just getting into DeFi, there are certain liquidity pools, there are certain tokens, there are a lot of scams out there. It's very hard to identify and quantify risk when you're dealing with decentralized assets. And so I think us as an industry could do a better job at showing some risk factors, whether that's health of liquidity pools, whether that's how many people are providing liquidity into a pool. One small example of this is if you were trading assets in a pool that has $10 million worth of liquidity, if that $10 million of liquidity was provided by one person, how safe is that pool, right? These are types of metrics that we don't currently have, or it's very hard to access them. I think that one thing that we could do to bring more transparency into the space is to just have a better understanding of overall risk when you're interacting with these decentralized protocols. The second point is a bit generic. I think it's a better, having a better user experience. I think most people in here would agree that Web3 is pretty notorious for having a relatively bad user experience. A lot of the applications are very nice, but it's just very complex to navigate. If you were a new user in the space, you'd have to explain how to use MetaMask. You'd have to explain a bridge. You'd have to explain, SushiSwap, Uniswap, PancakeSwap, etc. So I think having an overall better user experience is important. There isn't necessarily a direct answer here. I just think overall, there's ways that we could improve the overall experience to help drive people into DeFi. And finally, I think the third point is one reason why it's important to bring more transparency into DeFi is to ultimately accelerate broader DeFi adoption. I think that there's a lot of institutions, there's a lot of hedge funds, there's a lot of people that are now hearing about DeFi. Things like the FTX collapse, I think, really highlight DeFi and the benefits of DeFi. And so I think bringing more transparency into the space would actually help us accelerate as an industry to bring DeFi to a lot more people and to open up more opportunities for people. So now that we've outlined some of the importance of more transparency, how can data sources, providers, and users actually bring more transparency into DeFi? So how can we solve these problems? So the first point I have here is unbiased data aggregation. I think that this is an interesting point. I think that there's a lot of data providers. There's a lot of crypto news websites, crypto magazines, and some of them clearly pick winners, right? There are some hedge funds, some websites that openly admit to favoring certain chains, certain networks. I think unbiased data aggregation is incredibly important. I think that if we're trying to pick winners in this space, I think it's ultimately bad for the end user. I think trying to acknowledge and embrace the multi-chain aspect of crypto is probably the best path forward to help drive better user adoption. The second point here is user-centric liquidity aggregation. So early on, I showed a screenshot of 1inch, which is one trade aggregator. There's also others like 0x, Matcha, etc. I think overall, us as an industry need to encourage trade aggregators and make it easier to access them, easier to use them, and easier to understand. And so as a user, you don't need to know if Uniswap is the best place. Instead, you can go to a trade aggregator and they will tell you where the best place is to actually execute your trade. And the third point here is to provide easier access to cross-chain liquidity. This kind of ties into trade aggregators in the sense that as a user who's on Ethereum or might only be familiar with Ethereum, there could actually be better sources of liquidity on other blockchains. So if you were to bridge to Polygon and use QuickSwap, you might have a better price execution than Uniswap on Ethereum. And so again, I think this kind of ties into the second point with liquidity aggregators or trade aggregators, making it a little bit easier for people to access cross-chain opportunities and easier to understand what's actually going on in the space. So I think overall, we're in a very interesting time. I think in DeFi, I think that there's a lot of things pointing towards DeFi being a very good option for a lot of people to get rid of, I guess, centralized risk factors. I think that there's a few things that we could do to make these things a little bit easier. So that kind of wraps up what I have here. Hopefully, it shines some light on some of the issues, some of the benefits, and kind of where I think that we're headed and how we could do a little bit better overall. So appreciate everybody being here and listening. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Braden Abik, CTO of Blockport, for the speech. Following the program, we will hear a leading expert. He's also the leader of OKX. And he will share about the OKX ecosystem. And OKX has applied blockchain to build the next generation of financial ecosystem. They try to remove financial barriers and also develop the global economy. So I won't keep you wait any longer. Please welcome on the stage Mr. Jonathan Phan, Director of OKX Chain Ecosystem Development, SEA. Please welcome.
Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here at Ho Chi Minh. I want to discuss today about few aspects regarding the OKX ecosystem. So let's start with the agenda first. So today I will discuss quickly about OKX as a centralized exchange. Our first layer 1 EVM compatible called OKX chain, or also called OKC. The OKX Web3, and then the better for the end, the after party. So as many people know, OKX is a centralized exchange with all the very standard service like spot trading, derivatives, earning, and so on. But did you guys know that we have also a layer 1 called OKX chain, or OKC? What is the particularity of our chain? We are EVM and Cosmos compatible, which means all the developer who's been building on the most famous and trendy layer 1 like Solana, Ethereum, Polygon, or Binance Smart Chain, or even Cosmos chain can also deploy and work with us on OKX chain. Today, we can process almost more than 4,000 transactions per second. And we are working very strongly on the infrastructure to increase that number to 5,000 to 6,000 per second. On average, you will need 1 cent to process 100 transactions on our chain. Regarding the chain, we have also our own explorer called OKLink. It is actually like a cross-chain explorer. That means you can check all the different transactions on most famous chains such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, Binance, and obviously OKX chain. Today, we have more than 300 projects deployed on OKX chain. Just to give you some key projects that work with us, Tether deploy natively a smart contract on OKX chain. That means today, if you have a USDT on OKX chain, it is the native one back-to-back by Tether. Ledger, like the leader in the hardware wallet, also deploy and integrate OKX chain. Band protocol, known as the number 2 in terms of like Oracle, is also deployed on OKX chain. And we recently deployed Cosmos IBC, which means like today, we can transfer natively any token from OKX chain